Uh-huh. I just feel like I've been around the block, ripping up fantasy stock, working around the clock. Look at the view from the top. Researching rookies a lot? No, I just be listening to pods, yeah. One in particular, I'm just a messenger, let me just pass on the rock. Browning, brunning, pruning, pronouncing ain't what he's doing. What he's doing is not losing, but infusing you with new things. And there's Dennis the Bennett, yeah. The man is a menace, yeah. Building a dynasty, some of the finest things. Promise you, you won't regret it. Sly as a fox, cultured in pop. Give him his props. Here is a thought, here is a box. And you cannot compare them at all, so don't even try. Careful with the news, but when you use a take, I take up Tony Fire. I mean Dyer, because anyone else is a huge mistake. Whoa, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, yeah. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Hey, fantasy round table, fantasy round table, woo. Fantasy round table, come take a look at the crown, baby. Go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Football Roundtable podcast. We are happy to have you in on this delightful Friday. We are going to be continuing our look at power rankings for position groups, moving to the 16 through 9 group of AFC wide receivers. But before we jump into that, I'm joined as always by Dennis. How are you doing this Friday?
You know, I feel like I'm getting sick, man. My wife's been down with COVID, and I thought I'd avoided it. It's been about 9 days, and today I'm starting to feel kind of off my game. So she might have got me.
Not quite the present you were looking for Father's Day.
Well, I mean, I don't mind the isolation. That'll be fine.
Well, Matt is probably going to be joining us here in a little bit, but I think you wanted to share a little bit about an orphan you just picked up.
Yeah, I got talked into a Devy. It's a 14-team Devy with free agent auctions, orphan team. And, like, I haven't done Devy. Like, the only college football I really follow is Ohio State. So I'm going to be leaning on Matt and you guys over at C2C pretty heavily going forward. The free agent auction, restricted free agent auctions just started. Basically, you can franchise tag or apply a restricted free agent tag to players whose contracts expired this year. So I only had 3, Patrick Mahomes, Christian McCaffrey, and Robert Woods. So I franchise tagged Mahomes. That doubled his salary. I can't bid on CMC or Robert Woods, but I can match whatever the final bid is and retain them. The downside of it is looking at what the opening bid for McCaffrey is. It's like 5 years at like $4 million. And man, I don't want to, I'd like him back, but I don't want to tie up 5 years in a set contract for CMC coming off 2 lost years at 26 years old. 5 years is an awful long time. You know, that's a poison pill contract. On the other hand, I do have Sean Tucker and Bijan Robinson on my Devy squad, and Drake London was one of the guys on the Devy squad that's coming up to the big leagues this year. And I have 3 first-round picks in the upcoming depleted rookie draft. I don't know where they are exactly yet, but I'm hoping one of them is the 101 because then I can draft Kenneth Walker because he's still in the rookie pool.
You know, I've never done a contract league. I used to like to play the salary cap when I would play on Madden, but I just have no desire to have to do that kind of math now.
Yeah, we'll see what happens. I think it's going to be a train wreck.
Speaking of train wrecks, we are looking at AFC wide receiver squads, and it was fascinating looking over how we went on these. You know, in most of the position groups we looked at both conferences running backs, and we looked at NFC wide receivers. I feel like we were fairly close. We had some disagreements on some. Not AFC wide receivers, man. We are all over the board. There is only one team where we all have the same opinion, and that is the first team we're going to look at. As always, if you have been joining us the last couple of weeks when we do these, we rank them 1 to 16, 1 being the best, 16 being the most aspirational, and then we average the score together, and that drops them into a position divided by 3. The average score for the New England Patriots is 16, and if you're good at math, that will tell you that we all think they have the worst receiving core in the AFC. So, Dennis, seemed like the Patriots were a prime candidate to take a wide receiver early in last year's draft, a wide receiver early in this year's draft. They opted against it both times. They did make one move, getting Devontae Parker, but how are we feeling about the Patriots wide receiver core and the tools they're giving Mac Jones?
Not good, Bob. Not good. I think on one hand, I guess if I'm going to spin it positively, what Bill Belichick has said is, man, we cannot draft wide receivers, so we're not going to. We're going to trade for some. They traded for Devontae Parker, who's not, I don't think he's the savior there. They've got a couple guys they've got a lot of wide receiver 3s and 4s is what they have. So somebody's going to have to step up. I think Hunter Henry is a really nice tight end. He's definitely in that second group, could finish somewhere between tight end 6 and tight end 15. But with Jonnu Smith there and being there all offseason, there's potential that could get messy between the two of them. But there's not it's a low volume passing offense with Mac Jones, with no real high end wide receivers and no high end run tight end. It's it's the 16th ranked squad for a reason.
Yeah, and I should add that this time we are in consensus that we're looking at tight ends. I thought Hunter Henry did well last year and had good chemistry with Mac Jones, but they splashed out a lot of money last year on Henry and Jonnu Smith, and they don't seem to have any plan for Jonnu Smith. They also splashed out money on Aguilar and Kendrick Bourne. I don't know how I feel about them. I'm with you. Devontae Parker is now their best wide receiver, but I don't know. Have never really thought he was a true wide receiver 1 or really works in that role. It's going to be interesting to see how they do. Jacoby Myers obviously signed his tender. He's trying to get a long-term deal. I think the fact that they haven't gone for other wide receivers puts him in a good position. They have other kind of long shots on there. They just picked up little Jordan Humphrey. I think Ty Montgomery is still in that group. They haven't yet moved on from N'Keal Harry, I don't think, but we have not seen anything from him. It's hard to know what that group is going to be, and I don't think they're doing Mac Jones any favors. There are a couple of young quarterbacks that are on the bottom half of this list that their teams, made moves, but haven't exactly done them a lot of favors.
I mean, our lads has N'Keal Harry listed as a third stringer behind rookie Tyquan Thornton.
Well, I know they were trying to move him. Tyquan Thornton, that was an intriguing pick too. It felt like a pretty big reach where they went for him. I guess they like something. They like the speed. We'll see how it plays out. But that was the one team we were aligned behind. Now we're going to move. The next 3 teams are actually tied with an average of 14, but that's because we are all over the board when we're looking at them. I'm going to take them in the order I see them here. And so the first one up is the Houston Texans. Matt had them as his 15th ranked team. I wasn't that much better at 14, but Dennis, you seem to like the Texans the best. You had them at 13. So what vaulted the Texans over a couple of these other teams for you?
So as I'm looking at teams like Tennessee or Jacksonville, I tried to break down the receiving cores as like, who's the best player? And of those teams like that, it's Brandon Cooks. He's the best player. They need Nico Collins has to come on. Brevin Jordan started coming on at the tight end position last year. They did re-sign, I think, I don't know if it was Jordan Akins, maybe Pharaoh Brown. So they've kept their blocking tight end, and so that should free up Brevin Jordan to, be the pass catching tight end. Outside of uh, Brandon Cooks and Nico Collins, there's definitely some work to do. They did draft John Mechie, who I like. So like John Mechie to me is a great peak slot juju was my comp for John Mechie. It's still a tough situation because you've got Davis Mills who outperformed expectations last year, but that was mostly because there were no expectations last year. And now he's coming into this year and he's going to have to do well. I think he's still, a bottom end QB2 at best, but Brandon Cooks is still good. He's shown himself to be quarterback proof. I think John Mechie and Nico Collins both bring something to the table. And then they do have Philip Dorsett as their wide receiver 4, who does one thing really well, which is run fast and run far. And if Davis Mills can get the ball down to him, there is potential there, but it has to come to fruition. And I don't know if Lovie Smith is the guy to bring it out of him, but I do think Brandon Cooks at the top of the rotation there was better than anybody right now on these other teams.
Yeah, and I had it one notch lower than you at 14, and I had him above a couple other teams because of Brandon Cooks. And I love Brandon Cooks. I think he's probably been, since he went to the Texans, one of the more underrated receivers. My struggle with the Texans is beyond him, there's a lot of questions, and that includes what we see out of Davis Mills and Lovie Smith. As you mentioned, I like the potential of Brevin Jordan. I liked the pick of John Mechie. I thought Nico Collins has some potential. Chris Connolly was an interesting veteran signing. You mentioned Dorsett. I just don't know how this all comes together and what we see from this offense. And from a fantasy perspective, I like Brandon Cooks, but I have a lot of questions about the rest, so I just knocked them a little bit lower. But I did have them above the next team in our group, which is the Jacksonville Jaguars. I have the Jaguars set as my number 15 team. You had them at 14. Matt had them at 13. They end up in a tie here. And I guess what I just am not a believer in what Jacksonville did. On the plus side, they spent a lot of money this offseason to try to get pieces for Trevor Lawrence. I don't know that I think Christian Kirk is a number 1. I don't know what I think he is. Marvin Jones has been decent at times, wasn't incredible last year. I don't know what we're getting out of Zay Jones. I don't know what we're getting out of Laviska Shenault. And I am not a big Evan Ingram believer. I think every year we seem to be waiting for him to break out and break big, and it just doesn't quite happen. So that's why, for me, I had the Jacksonville Jaguars at 15. But, Matt, you had them at 13. What do you like about the Jaguars?
And welcome.
Thank you. It's been a fun day. That's a really good question. I probably should have tried to become a tad bit more prepared as I made my way on screen here. So, stalling. Where are the Jacksonville Jaguars at? Because I haven't honestly pulled up the sheet yet.
They're one of 3 teams tied for 14. Matt has them at 15. I have them at 14, and you have them at 13.
All right, so Christian Kirk, I know a lot of people did not like him coming over with the massive deal that he got. He was probably a tad bit overpaid, although I think you're worth what someone's willing to pay you, and the Jacksonville Jaguars were willing to pay him a lot of money. I don't know that we've seen – oh, and there goes Matt. He hated my Christian Kirk discussion so much he just decided to leave. I don't know that Christian Kirk is as bad as we say he is. He actually had a couple of good seasons, and then you get the injuries that he's had, and I just don't think he's a good fit for Cliff Kingsbury's offense. He comes over now, and I do think he's likely the 1 or maybe like the 1A, 1B paired with Marvin Jones, who I still think is a decent wide receiver. I'm kind of out on LaVisca Chenault, so that part definitely hurts a little bit. And Laquan Treadwell, though he's never going to be a guy that we're really worried about being an absolute stud for fantasy, I still think has some value. We saw him have a couple good games toward the end there with Jacksonville as well, right? I still kind of believe in Evan Ingram as well, which might be why they boosted up a little bit more for me, maybe than you guys. He's been fairly productive, and I think in this offense could be a very interesting player. And I'm also kind of betting in as we talked about this on the NFC side. You had factored in quarterbacks, I had just factored in tight ends, and we're kind of putting all that together now, right? I think Trevor Lawrence is likely going to be a little bit better. If you go and look, he was, I believe, QB 30 last year in and a lot of the accuracy stats, like he was just bad. I don't believe that that's the quarterback that we will see this year. I do think some of that was just Urban Meyer and Darrell Bevell's offense, which I think all three of us had stated at the time was not going to be a good fit in the NFL, and we kind of saw that play out. So while I definitely think they could have some better players, I'd love to see them possibly draft a wide receiver to go with these guys. I really think Christian Kirk is going to be a good fit for this offense for what he can do overall. I mean, he was one of my higher ranked wide receivers coming out in his draft class, and I just think he was just miscast in Arizona. I think him going here and getting a chance to be the one and really kind of be the guy here with Lawrence is going to be a very interesting fit, and I think it's going to work out overall in the long game. And not that he's really a receiver, but I think adding Travis Etienne in there is also going to help open things up a little bit because he will get some receiving work and require defenders to kind of key in on him.
Yeah, I like Kirk as a player. He was wide receiver 23 last year. I don't think he's a wide receiver 1, though. I think he's definitely a team's wide receiver 2, a complementary player. And maybe, we don't know what the conversations were, but it could be that Jacksonville was just in that situation last year where nobody was going to go there unless they massively overpaid. And so, you look at it and you're like, well, they overpaid for Kirk. Well, they could have overpaid for a better receiver and spent a lot more money and put them in a not as comfortable a position from a salary cap perspective. So I don't hate it. I just think that he's a wide receiver too. I think Marvin Jones is running out of gas. I think he's going to pop. He'll have his annual 4-touchdown game. I don't hate Evan Ingram, but I think it wouldn't surprise me if him and Dan Arnold are the tight end version of Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams this year. They'll be great and productive for Trevor Lawrence's fantasy numbers, but I don't know that either one of them are going to be great for fantasy managers. And then, Treadwell he's come around and he's providing a specific service to that team now. He's a big wide receiver that doesn't need a ton of space. And then Zay Jones is the deep threat. So what they've done is they've kind of filled a whole bunch of roles. We've got a bunch of guys that are filling roles. I don't think it's terribly deep because I don't think they have a lot of cross-role functionality. I think you got guys that are good at one thing and that if somebody gets hurt, they may be left lacking. But I think it could be good for Lawrence, but maybe not necessarily good for any of the wide receivers, but probably Kirk will get the volume.
Yeah, and the other reason, again, welcome back, Matt. I thought maybe it was my take on Christian Kirk just really kind of drove you off the deep end there. So
apparently, my internet hit 5 o'clock and punched out for the weekend.
I would not blame it at all. Again, just going back through Kirk's stats. I mean, last year 982 yards with Arizona, not being the one. And I honestly don't even think really the 2 there. That's still a pretty good season. Granted, Kyler Murray a lot more proven at this moment than Trevor Lawrence. The other reason I was really high on Evan Ingram was Doug Peterson. We know he's bringing his offense over from Philadelphia, and I know Matt said it, and I've been with Matt. Like, I don't think Doug Peterson is really that great of an offensive coordinator, but he loves to target his tight ends. And when we've seen Evan Ingram get the volume, he's been very productive. I agree with what Dennis is saying. Like, I don't think anybody. I do think Christian Kirk's going to be fantasy relevant this year. I would not be surprised if he finishes as a low end wide receiver too, because I think he's going to get targeted a lot. And Trevor Lawrence is a very accurate quarterback, despite what the stats tell you from last season. I just think it's going to be a different offense. Overall, I think it will be a better team. I think they're going to be a playoff team or anything like that. No, but I think they're going to be down in games, forcing them to pass the ball. Evan Ingram and Christian Kirk, I think, are both going to be fantasy relevant. So again, that's just kind of overall what boosted them up for me.
Well, the third team tied with an average of 14 for us is the Tennessee Titans. And in this case, I was the highest at 13. Matt had them at 14. Dennis, you had them at 15. Why do you hate the Titans?
Well, you got Robert Woods, who's their de facto number one, coming off an injury. It's probably going to be a few weeks getting up to speed. There was definitely a drop-off in Ryan Tannehill's play last year. He's going to need to bounce back big time. And to make that easier, the team traded away the best wide receiver. I get Treylon Burks is almost a direct replacement for A.J. Green, but we haven't seen him execute with the efficiency that A.J. Brown did. Burks is going to get some volume, but will he be able to turn it into the production that A.J. Brown did? Austin Hooper, I think he'll be better than he was in Cleveland, but if we're being honest, is that a ringing endorsement? And then the rest of your receivers, Nick Westbrook-Ikini, Racey McMath, Des Fitzpatrick. I think the best thing that could happen for Tennessee is that Kyle Phillips wins one of the wide receiver positions. They put him into the slot. But I think until they pull the trigger and move on from Tannehill, it might be an awful lot more of the Derrick Henry show. I think they're going to run Derrick Henry into the ground. Then they're going to follow him up and run Hassan Haskins as many times as they can. And then Henry and Tannehill will wander off into the sunset, and it'll be time to reload, restart, rebuild.
Yeah, for me, I like Cooper. Definitely needs to be in an offense where he's going to get targeted. I don't know that happens here. I mean, we've not seen them ever really implement the tight end outside of a couple years with Jonnu, and that was more Arthur Smith, and he's now gone. He's in Atlanta. Robert Woods, I actually think, is the wide receiver you want to roster on this team. Everybody looks at Treylon Burks and says, hey, he's the A.J. Brown duplicate. That's what all the, quote-unquote draft sites have compared him to. That's what he's gonna do. He's still a very raw prospect, and I don't know that he's going to get up to speed in time to learn how to take some of these other, rushing plays or anything like that, like we've already seen Robert Woods do in LA. I actually would not be surprised if he's the more fantasy relevant guy. I still think, while I like Treylon Burks, he was my wide receiver 3 in this class. I do think he is eventually going to be good. I think he's one of those guys that it's going to take a year to get there. I don't know that he comes out just guns a-blazing this year and is an absolute stud. So that's kind of why I rank them low. I mean, right now, all the love there's nobody else on this team that's being talked about except for Kyle Phillips, who I can't even remember where he got drafted, but it was late. I want to say it was like 6th round. I could be wrong on that. But he was drafted very late. I do think that he is a okay player, but I'd be very surprised if he ends up being anything fantasy relevant. So it's really just Robert Woods. In my opinion, it's really just Robert Woods and Treylon Burks, and I think Treylon Burks is going to take some time to kind of get up to speed. So that's why I had them at 14. Really not much separating these bottom teams for me, though.
Yeah, and I guess I had him higher because I like Austin Hooper at tight end better than any of the tight ends we've seen for the 3 other teams we've discussed. I think he is a good pass-catching tight end, and I think that's something that they realized they missed when they let Jonnu Smith go. They didn't really fill that in last year. And you mentioned Tannehill falling off last year. I'm going to argue that they didn't have a running game behind him most of the season. A.J. Brown missed quite a bit of time. Julio Jones was a complete bust signing or trade. Josh Reynolds was a complete bust signing. What did he have out there for him? And his completion percentage was better than the year prior. And his yards, he was about 85 yards off of the pace that he had the year prior. I don't think he was quite as bad as we think. He had more interceptions, and I think that's because they had to fundamentally change their offense, and he was pressing more. He had attempts in the 400 range, and they upped it to 531 because they didn't have the same kind of dominant running game toward the back half of the season. I like the combination of Woods and Burks. I thought Nick Westbrook-Akini looked good when he was given a chance last year. I like him as a third, kind of a third receiver, a complementary receiver. I'm with you that Treylon Burks may take a little bit longer. He's not going to be A.J. Brown probably right off the bat. I don't know about the rest of their depth, but honestly, Jacksonville's entire group left me cold. And outside of Brandon Cooks, I have a ton of questions about Houston. So I would take Robert Woods and Austin Hooper and what I saw out of Nick Westbrook-Akini with Ryan Tannehill in a better team, a team that's going to be better all around than either of those other two teams than what I had below them.
I don't need you debunking my theories with stats and shit, Matt.
The next team up in the order is the Baltimore Ravens. They come in with an average of 11.33. We were actually pretty well in lockstep with this team. Matt and I had them at 11. Dennis had them at 12. So, Matt, how do you feel about the Ravens passing attack, and is it mostly Mark Andrews for you?
Yeah, it's Andrews and Bateman, and that's kind of why I have them here. They're right in lockstep with all the teams we've just been talking about. It's really 1-2 guys that you're counting on. Had Marquise Hollywood Brown not been traded, I think I'd have them much higher. I just don't think there's really anything else outside of these guys. I mean, I like Tylan Wallace coming out of Oklahoma State. Hasn't really shown anything. People I know like Devin Duvernay in the slot really hasn't shown anything. James Prochet, surprised he's still in the lead. Slade Bolden was like barely a wide receiver on his team in Alabama. I doubt he's going to do much in the NFL. Mekhi Polk is an interesting player, but undrafted. Chances of that hitting are pretty slim. So overall, we know Mark Andrews is an absolute stud. He's going to be locked in at worst as a top 3 tight end unless he suffers some kind of injury. And I do think that Rashad Bateman is going to be a very, very good wide receiver this year. But we saw Rashad Bateman struggle with injuries last year. If either one of those guys goes down, it's Lamar relying on just that one, because I don't think any of these other guys can step up and fill any kind of role. So that's really what drops them down for me. They need those two guys to stay healthy all season long. Because I'm going to be honest, even if Lamar gets hurt, it doesn't matter. I can't for the life of me remember who the backup was last year.
Tyler Huntley.
Yeah.
Tyler Huntley still came in and played very well. I actually had an argument about this. I jumped on with John McGlynn. We did an AFC North podcast, and we were talking. I was supporting the Browns, and a question was brought up: would you in Dynasty rather have Mark Andrews or Kyle Pitts? I said I'd rather have Kyle Pitts, and the rest of the group went Mark Andrews. And they asked for my reasoning why. If you actually go back and look at Mark Andrews' stats, he has been right around the 800 receiving mark every single year until last season. But if you go look at what the difference was, he started getting 100-plus receiving yards a game when, what's his name again?
Tyler Huntley.
Tyler Huntley came in at quarterback. If you look at when Lamar Jackson was in there, he was only averaging 60 yards a game. When Tyler Huntley came in, it was 80, 139, 169, 180 something, and then another 89 game that pushed him over that 1,000-yard mark. While Mark Andrews is an absolute stud for the tight end position, I don't think he changes much overall for that team. And I think they're really going to have to rely on Rashad Bateman. While I love him, I understand the questions on him. And again, if any one of those guys goes down, Baltimore's completely screwed.
I'm thinking, and I just went and looked to see, because we have this perception that Baltimore is a running team. They run all the time. And they kind of do, but they were 9th in the league last year in pass attempts. And
what were they the year before, though?
I don't know. I'm only looking at last year.
Because last year they were on their 4th-string running back. That's my biggest fear on that stuff.
Right, but that's kind of what the offense has been. And I think that, as Lamar has grown, and now the caveat being, I'm the lowest on the Ravens of us here. I just happen to want to go and look and sort of see what happened. So they bring in a quarterback out of the University of Mars that most of us hadn't heard of, and they still ended up they were like chucking it and ducking it like it was nobody's business. But the running backs were putting up numbers. I mean, people were looking forward to starting Devontae Freeman last year because he was getting volume and putting up numbers. So
they increased their pass attempts by 205 last year. But to your point, they were still third in the league in rush attempts. They were a little bit lower than the year prior, but they still tried to run the ball a lot.
So they're getting off a lot of plays.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they don't have a strong wide receiver group, definitely.
Yeah, and there's been a lot of talk about them. About Lamar needs to improve as a passer and needs to be better as a passer. And it's curious the move they made this offseason. I liked the Rashad Bateman selection last year. I still like his potential, but we didn't exactly see a robust rookie season. And now there's a lot of pressure on him with Brown gone because there's not a lot behind him. It's a lot of question marks. But for me, Mark Andrews has been so good and so consistent. It was hard to justify it, if we're including tight end. When I wasn't thinking about tight ends, I had the Ravens as my number 15 wide receiver group. But with Mark Andrews, I vaulted him a little bit, quite a bit up there. The next wide receiver group is a team near and dear to Matt's heart, and that is the Cleveland Browns. They come in with an average of 10.67, and I know you're all wondering, since Matt said last week he was for sure putting them at 16, how they ended up so high that Dennis and I must have them at 1 or 2. Well, Matt relented and moved them up. He's still the lowest, so he hasn't come that far off. He's still the lowest, has him at 12. Dennis had him at 11. I had him at 9, and the only reason I can justify having them at 9 is my unbridled love of Amari Cooper, which is probably the reason Matt has them the lowest. I also really like David Njoku. I know that the rest of their supporting pieces are a little bit unproven, but if Deshaun Watson plays for them, that could boost some of those pieces up. If it's Jacoby Brissett, I'll still love Amari Cooper, but he may not have as good of a year. But Matt, how did you eventually move them to 12 instead of 16?
Well, because I just think the mixture of Amari Cooper, David Njoku, and Harrison Bryant is a little bit better than some of the teams below them. But I'm not really high on Cooper. I don't think Watson plays at all this year. And even if he does, I think you're looking, he's not going to get like a 2-game suspension. It's likely going to be 10 or more. Amari Cooper has not been as great as a lot of people like to make it out to be. His finishes 21, 14, 36, 19, 10, and 15. He's consistently finishes like a wide receiver too, but I shouldn't say but he consistently gets talked about like he's a top 12 wide receiver. He's finished top 12 once in his entire career. That was 3 years ago with Dak. We're not going to see that offense here. And I don't think, not that this matters because we're only talking about this year, but if Watson doesn't play, we're not going to see Amari Cooper another year anyways. He's going to be with Jacoby Brissett. Jacoby Brissett started multiple seasons in Indianapolis due to injuries. The best produced wide receiver he got was T.Y. Hilton 1 year at wide receiver 27. I think that's the best case scenario you have for Amari Cooper because he's not the deep threat that I think T.Y. Hilton is. I've said it before, living down here in Dallas. Amari Cooper is not involved early in the game and doesn't get some early on catches. He tends to check out of games. Well, that's probably going to happen more often than not next year because I would not be surprised if they really rely on Kareem Hunt and Nick Chubb to run the ball. I like David Njoku. I think he's improved every single year. He seems to always get that injury, though, that stops him or slows him down. Harrison Bryant, I felt like took a pretty decent step forward as well. I think both those guys are going to be good. But if you really take away Amari Cooper, which I think defenses are going to try and do, Isaiah Weston, Javon Mims, don't know who they are. Jamarcus Bradley, cool, whatever. Mike Woods, transferred twice in college, still couldn't do anything in a very highly vaunted Oklahoma offense. Now he's here in a run-first heavy offense in Cleveland. Great. Not going to do much. Got a lot of high hopes for David Bell. But I'm also worried about him because Deshaun Watson has not once in his career favored a slot wide receiver, which is all the rumors is where David Bell's going. Donovan Peoples-Jones, he's a great wide receiver, 3 on an NFL team. He's going to be nothing for you in fantasy. It's literal, to pun intended, dog shit, this entire roster. Outside of Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt, and if Deshaun Watson plays Deshaun Watson. If Watson were playing, I'd feel a little bit better about it because he can raise the level of every single player on that team. But I don't think any of these guys are going to do anything for you this year. I would not be surprised if the highest scoring receiving weapon is David Njoku. That's not great. So I wanted him lower, but
well, I agree with most of what you said there. I think Amari Cooper's finishes are definitely less controversial than Deshaun Watson's finishes, but I think with Peoples-Jones is I think he's an up and comer. David Bell, they play 2 very different roles. Again, it looks like the Browns have taken and slotted some people in with a specific type of role, and I don't know if that's going to work or not. Amari is going to struggle if we spend the season with Jacoby Brissett. Honestly, I feel like, and this is me, and I think if Brissett is out, I think you start Baker Mayfield. And if Baker says, I won't play, then you say, we won't pay. So you shut the fuck up and you get out there and you play and you win games. If you want to move on, you win games and you make yourself look good by willing this team to victory. You don't start Jacoby Brissett. I get it. He's got his feelings hurt because the Browns decided they wanted to bring in a better quarterback with a shady personal history. That sucked. I don't think the Browns should have went that way. I don't know that Baker was the answer, but I definitely don't think that pursuing Deshaun Watson was the way to go either. But it's good. It could very well be a really ugly season in Cleveland, or it could be a season where Nick Chubb is finally unleashed.
I just don't think Baker plays another stat for Cleveland. I know I've kind of changed my thoughts on that. I really thought he could come out there and lead him to a playoff, but at this point, all the NFL insiders are saying he's likely either on his way to Carolina or he's going to be cut, just like Jimmy G. I don't think he's not going to be. It's going to be Brissett. And I don't think Watson plays this year. So.
I don't disagree with that premise. I'm just saying what I would do is I would hold him. I'd be like, look, dude, if you want to get paid, we owe you $18 million.
I don't think he'd care. I think Baker's petty enough that he'd be like, you don't want to pay me? Fine. He's already made a decent chunk of change. He'll sit and wait. I really don't think he cares. Like, I agree with what you're saying, but I think
if he sits, though, because then it would become a holdout and his contract tolls. It isn't like it keeps ticking.
Yeah, he's got to come back by week 8 or 9 or something like that. But at that point, he comes back. They can't throw him out there as he's not going to be ready. So then you're throwing him out there by week 11 or 12, and you've already been rolling with Jacoby Brissett. You're out of the playoffs at that point. So he's still going to get what he wants. I don't know. It's going to be fascinating to watch. I guess I don't think it happens.
So sad.
You're probably right. But...
Those State Farm commercials, the at home with Baker Mayfield, could be a lot more interesting if they're at his actual home this year.
Yeah, I'd love to. Well, no, I won't say anything. Next team.
Well, the next team on our countdown is the Indianapolis Colts, and they come in at an average of 10.33. I was the lowest. I had them at 12. Dennis had them at 10. Matt, you had them at 9. What do you like about the Colts?
Look, we were supposed to factor all this stuff in here, right? Tight ends, quarterback play. They still, in my opinion, have, if you don't want to say the best offensive line in the game, it's top 3. Matt Ryan, his entire career, has produced a wide receiver 1 when he's starting. Michael Pittman has been really good with bad quarterback play for 2 years. I mean, he was supported by Carson Wentz, who maybe we shit on a little bit too much. He made some really dumb plays, but Carson Wentz overall last year for fantasy was a lot better than some of us give him credit for. But Matt Ryan's better than that. Now you've got a stud in Michael Pittman, who is going to, I would not be surprised if he finishes as a top 12 wide receiver or within that top 15 range. So you've already got an alpha guy there. I am big on Alec Pierce. I think he fits that offense very well. Big red zone threat, can do some very interesting things. This may be just me being an idiot, but I'm not 100% out on Paris Campbell. If you've seen those camp videos, it's looking good. As long as he doesn't get injured, I think he's a dynamic slot player. Mo Alley Cox is what he is. I don't know that the tight end position is going to be great there. Jelani Woods, I wasn't that high on. I know he had like a really great RAS score. Kyle Granson was a guy a lot of people liked last year. Maybe he takes a step forward. I just really think it's about Pittman and Alec Pierce and at Paris Campbell. But even then, they've got Kiki Kuti. Can he do something? I don't know. Desmond Patton had a couple good games last year. I think those top three, though, are really good players who I think, like Pittman, I think can be a wide receiver one this year. And then you got Alec Pierce and Paris Campbell. I think one of them can finish as a wide receiver 3 with Matt Ryan throwing the ball. No, we're not supposed to factor this in, but you also got Naheem Hines who can catch the ball a little bit as well. Like overall, I think this receiving group is just going to be really good. And I think the volume they'll get, the quarterback play is really going to boost them up.
I mean, I struggled a little bit with him. I have him at 10. Because I agree, Pittman is on pace to be a wide receiver 1. And Pierce, I do think he brings a speed element to the team that is going to be really beneficial. And I'm not out on Paris Campbell either. Now, when it comes to acquiring him, it's definitely got to be the right price. But I also feel that if Ashton Doolin can fill that Paris Campbell role just equally as well as Paris, he's not quite as fast as Paris Campbell. But I think he may be a better receiver. The tight end is up in the air. I think they're going to flash. You're going to have tight end is going to be a roller coaster for the Indianapolis Colts. Mo Alley Cox is great and he's a big threat, but it could get scary. He could have completely disappear. He could score 2 touchdowns and have 70 yards.
Yeah, I struggled with it a little bit too. I really like Michael Pittman, and I like Matt Ryan there. I want to like Pierce and Campbell, but I just don't. It's hard to have confidence, I guess, at this point. And beyond that, I'm not really confident in anyone behind them. And I think their tight end group is subpar. So that's where I ended up. I was debating some of the teams in the block there, and that's just where I landed. I really like Michael Pittman. I wanted to put them higher, but I just don't have a ton of confidence. I think they're also going to be a heavy rushing team. We've seen that that's what Frank Reich wants to do. So I don't know, how many targets are there going to be for some of these guys? You referenced the offensive line. It's still decent, but they have lost some pieces the last few years. I don't think it's what it was a couple of years ago. And, I want to believe Matt Ryan's going to snap back, but there were times the last couple of years in Atlanta where he did not look very good. And this is the 5th quarterback in 5 seasons now for the Colts. They just continuously are rotating that lack of consistency, trying to get something going. I still love Michael Pittman, but that was kind of it for me with the Colts, and that's why I dropped them a little lower. The final team on our countdown today is one that the New York Jets. The average is 9.33, and that's because Matt and I had them at 10. Dennis, you had them at 8. What impresses you about the Jets?
Elijah Moore, Garrett Wilson, heck, even Corey Davis. I think they added 2 good tight ends in C.J. Uzomah and Tyler Conklin. They're not the big, fast, super athletic tight ends. They're the 9-yard, always open kind of tight ends. They're not going to run away from people. No David Njoku's there, but they're good tight ends. But I think the potential for the top 3 this is one of those situations where I could see them all being top 25 like Teddy Bridgewater did. They all are in the range of like 25 to 17 this year. They've got some playmakers. I know I have a bias towards Garrett Wilson, but I love Elijah Moore. I've went out and I've made him the centerpiece of a bunch of trades in the offseason. I think they are all going to really meld together, and there's still hope for Denzel Mims as the 4. Jeff Smith, they got Braxton Berrios, who the guy gets crapped on a lot, but every time they put Braxton Berrios in and say, we need you to play 75% of the snaps, he produces. He's not as good as Elijah Moore. He's not as athletically gifted or as talented as Elijah Moore, and he is not going to displace Elijah Moore from the starting lineup. But if Corey Davis or Garrett Wilson gets injured, it wouldn't surprise me if they move one of those two over into Davis's spot and they put Berrios in as the starter. So they go 4 deep pretty comfortably.
For me, it's mostly Zach Wilson. We have to factor that part in. I don't trust him to be able to get these guys the ball enough to make them efficient. I like Elijah Moore. I like Garrett Wilson. That's kind of where I stop. I am one of those people who shits on Braxton Berrios. Couple good games here and there every year doesn't do it for me. He's not been that consistent. When they've asked him to step up, I can't disagree. He's been phenomenal, but I don't think he can do that over a full season. Corey Davis, I think he just is what he is. He's not a bad wide receiver. He's just not a great wide receiver either. When he gets the volume, that 1 year in Tennessee, he was really good. Outside of that, he's kind of like a middling wide receiver 3, which is good for, I think, where he is in this offense. I don't think they expect him to be the top-end wide receiver. It's going to be either Elijah Moore or Garrett Wilson. But then it comes down to the quarterback play, and I just don't trust that Zach Wilson's going to be able to elevate all 3 of them. Can he elevate one? I think so. And I think that's likely Elijah Moore. Those two seem to have a pretty good connection last year. Garrett Wilson is an intriguing player. I really like him. He was my wide receiver 1 coming out. This is one of the teams I really did not want him to go to. C'est la vie. He's here. Got to deal with it. I just don't know that outside of Moore, any of these guys are really going to produce heavily for fantasy, because we've also seen in this offense coming from this Kyle Shanahan tree, they don't really seem to focus in on a bunch of wide receivers. It seems to be kind of like a one wide receiver group. Then they kind of spread it around. It's very run-heavy offense. I think that's why they got Breece Hall. I expect them to do a lot of running with Breece Hall and Michael Carter. They improved that offensive line. And it's going to kind of be the Elijah Moore show. So that's what dropped him to 10. Probably could have moved him up a little bit higher because I do really believe in Garrett Wilson. I just don't know what to do with them. And I think Jeremy Ruckert is actually the tight end to own here. And people may think that that's homerism, but I just don't think any of these other tight ends have really shown that they're that special. And I think Ruckert has a true chance to be. Just to point out, because he was drafted 5th round. Does that sound right?
3rd round.
Third round. So just to point this out, and Dennis will know, Dennis is also a very big Ohio State fan. They never used really Jeremy Ruckert at all as in the receiving game because of how loaded their wide receivers were. But when they asked him to, he made big plays. He's a very good blocker. He did absolutely nothing in the pre-draft process because his foot was injured. He was at the combine. I believe he interviewed, but he could not do any testing, did not do anything at the Ohio State Pro Day, and the Jets still took him in the 3rd round. He's a very special tight end. I would not be surprised if he is the best tight end on this roster. He would be the guy that I want to roster. Probably not going to do much this year. So it's just Elijah Moore for me.
Yeah, I struggled a little bit with the Jets too, because I like a lot of the players that they grabbed, and on paper they have a pretty deep receiving group and a lot of options at tight end. But the trouble I was having is that's on paper. We haven't seen it come together. We saw some flashes from Elijah Moore. That was great. Corey Davis signed that huge contract last year and didn't really get a lot out of it. I am leaning more towards Matt. I'm not sure Tyler Conklin or CJ Uzoma is a guy I totally believe in. Ruckert may end up being the guy, but who knows? They have plethora of weapons in the passing game. They're already talking about how much that Breece Hall and Michael Carter could be involved as pass catchers. And then it's the question of Zach Wilson, what they're going to face in the AFC. So I end up dropping them a little bit further. I love the potential But for me right now, as we sit in June of 2022, it's potential and not, there are definitely other squads that have more concrete evidence and have had more history of production.
Yeah, I think that what you just said is probably the way I could have worded it. I feel like that's what dropped them for me. Every team ahead of them has at least one proven top-end wide receiver, and I believe in practically every single one of those quarterbacks outside of one ahead of them, but that dude's got like 3 really good weapons. So that's what dropped them for me. I don't think it's necessarily we're trying to say that the Jets are bad, but like they're just in a loaded AFC conference with a lot of really good receivers and really, really good quarterbacks.
Well, that does it for the bottom half of our AFC wide receiver power rankings. We were less in lockstep than we were in some of the other position groups. That will continue on Monday when we look at the top half of the AFC wide receivers. A lot of difference of opinion between the three of us, so that'll be fun to look at. But before we get out of here, do you guys have anything else to add?
I don't. Happy Father's Day to the fathers, I guess. I lied. I did.
Yeah, happy Father's Day to all the fathers out there. Couple more weeks and we get the last 2 episodes of Stranger Things. So
I know, just in time for you to get back. Fortunately, it doesn't drop next weekend because as you have quite a few commitments, that would have been a real bummer.
one Bluetooth earpiece in, just sitting in the pew, like, yeah, congratulations. Oh my God, Maxine, no.
Matt's just crying. He's like, oh, he got really moved by the wedding. That's it,
yeah.
exactly. That's it.
People believe it. I'm a softie.